All right, happy Saturday, listeners. This morning, I am sitting back with Les Ward, an arson investigator for Austin Fire Department and father to a 9-year-old son. Despite the fact that he's held titles such as dispatcher, hazmat specialist, and firefighter, he's admitted that one of the scariest roles he's had so far is being a father, but at the same time, one of the most rewarding. Les comes to the studio with 25 years of public safety experience, with one of his more rewarding roles being cave rescues. I'm excited to dive into Les's cultural perspective as he's lived in multiple states in the U.S. and has varying hobbies, including juggling, roller skating, climbing, and more recently, improv classes. I'm also excited to hopefully talk to him about identity. I'm going to be putting him a little bit on the spot, as I hope we can talk about the book Alter Egos. Regardless of where today's conversation, though, Les, I'm really grateful to have you and Theo here. Welcome to your episode of David Saturday Night Sit Back.
Thanks.
Yeah, well, you're welcome. One thing I wanted to just kick off with improv classes. When you wrote that down, I was not expecting to read that. What motivated you to want to do that?
A combination of things. I did a little bit of theater in middle school. Had a drama teacher who was very positive towards that, and she actually told me she'd be disappointed if I didn't do some sort of performing as I grew up. And I figured that was just juggling. Juggled all through high school. Did some performing with that. Then I got into my current job as an arson investigator, which involves being in law enforcement. And I found that I got pretty nervous talking to suspects. You know, this guy might have committed a crime. You know, can't mess this up, and I'm on camera. And my partner, who I work with, great guy, has been real good for me. We're at Rudy's one day, and we ran into an LA firefighter in line. And by the time we were through the line, you would have thought we were best friends. And my partner pulled me aside later. He says, "Man, you know, I watched you. I met a complete stranger, and by the end of the line, you were best friends with him." He said, "You need to talk to suspects the same way." I went, "Huh, that's an interesting idea." So I did that. I treat them like it's a friend, like somebody new that I met. I mean, kind of like getting on a podcast.
Yeah.
And so fast forward through my son's school. It's a private school, Apogee Cedar Park, and the folks that have started that up started off with doing like a boys development program. Dads started hearing these mentor calls that they do every week and started asking, "Hey, what about us?" And so they developed this basically a program for the dads that when you're part of the school, they roll the dads into it automatically with tuition. And our month 3, month 2, I don't remember exactly when. It's a year-long program, but the subject for the month was civil discourse. And one of the challenges for that month was to do some sort of public speaking. And when they talked about it, they said, "Now, those of you that are in careers that teach and all this stuff, you know, challenge yourself." And I've been teaching for 20 years as part of public safety stuff. So they had specifically mentioned doing improv. And I kind of went, this is something I've kind of been curious about for a couple of years, because I went to Hideout Theater on Congress one night, and they had this thing when you bought your ticket, you could throw your ticket in a basket. Mm-hmm. And so they do the show in 3 sets, and they do the first set. Second set, they pull names out of the hat. And if you get drawn, they take you upstairs and put you through a 1-set crash improv course. And third set, they bring you down, they put you on stage.
Excellent.
Yeah. I mean, why not, you know? I'm just impulsive enough. I was like, sure. And of course, first name out of the hat. Great. What have I done? Go up there. And the thing that stood out to me was they said during the class, so many people try to be funny, especially improv. And you're nervous and all this stuff, and you're trying to think about what can I do that's going to be funny. And they said specifically, don't. Just watch the scene, react, go with it. You'll be surprised what'll be funny. And so we got down and they're doing this scene, and it ends up, scene involves 2 people on a stage after hours, and they're making out. Mm-hmm. And I just had this random thought of, like, what if a janitor happened to just walk across doing his job?
Yeah.
And so I stepped on stage and I walked across just like I was sweeping the stage. And the guy in the scene looks up and he says, "Oh, sorry, sir." And I say, "Oh, he's okay." And I just kept walking, and the place lost it. What? Not something I ever would have thought would have been funny. I just trying to add to the scene. It was addictive. Yeah. It's like, man, I might be fun to do these classes. fast forward, have a kid, work and stuff. And then with my schedule, it's hard to do regular classes like that. So this challenge comes up through the men's program. Happened to look it up and go to an improv show, and next thing I knew, I had signed up for a class. I was like, because with my current job, I have the flexibility to be able to go to class on the nights that I'm working. And so yeah, I did level 1, just finished that last month. Got to do a show, and again, same thing, like got on stage a few times. What I thought was going to be funny, just flat on its face. The one thing I got on stage and just reacted and did what came to mind was the thing that everybody still is talking about.
Yeah.
All the friends that were there, even the folks I was in class with were like, that was amazing. So it encouraged me, and I signed up for level 2.
Cool.
Started this week, and so
yeah.
here we go. There's
we
6
go.
levels. We'll see how far we go.
You're getting to 6.
Yeah.
I'm going to manifest that right now.
I fear that is probably going to be a reality.
Yeah, I have 3 friends who are aspiring comedians. They're very early on. They all have day jobs. This is something that they're just going to. Have you heard of a banana phone by chance?
Yes.
So they're going to stuff like that where it's free, and they're just looking to get stage time where they can just practice bits that may or may not eventually be part of a main act that they might use on a stage at like the Vulcan or Mothership or wherever. And I've seen them do stand-up a few times, and I have told them, because I like to be honest with my friends, like, your guys' stuff, it needs some work. But then they come on the podcast this week, and they're hilarious.
Yeah.
And I told them, why don't you guys just re-listen to the podcast, and the parts where we were dying, take whatever that bit of that conversation was, and why don't you go test that on a stage? Because to your point, they get on stage and they're not that funny, but then they come on the podcast and we're all laughing. So it's like,
it's so organic.
Are the 4 of us just idiots and we just think we're funny, or is there something to what you just said about when they're not trying to perform, they're hilarious, but then they get a mic in front of them and it's like all of a sudden they just...
I feel like that on stage. Like my girlfriend, obviously part of why I love her is because she laughs at my jokes, but and I love dad jokes. But I do a lot of pun kind of oriented stuff. I mean, I had one station I worked at. You can ask those guys. I think they were happy when I left.
Don't say that.
But and lovingly. But we would get in these. One of the guys we worked with, we got in these great pun battles. His name is Mark Frost. His brother's actually a musician, so look him up. I'll plug for him. Mark is just this brilliant guy, and we'd get in these pun battles at work. And one night we're at the dinner table. Mind you, there's, I think, 8 of us, 11 of us. Yeah, because we had the chief there and everything. So there's 8 guys, firefighters around this table. We get going on this little pun battle. People are throwing stuff out. Well, the subject kind of became trains or like railroad sort of stuff. And he threw one out. I don't remember what it was. It was good. It was one time I just went, oh, I think he got me. Like, because usually I would win these battles. And I was like, oh, man, he finally got me. And then all of a sudden I stood up and I said, you better watch the way you're conducting yourself. And he just put his head down. Oh, God. The rest of the table just dropped their head and went, oh, please stop, please stop. We got up and started doing dishes. But I'll make those jokes, and, like you said, just talking here, I'll crack them and people are laughing. I get on stage, it's like, I don't know what to do. So trying to figure out how to tap into that, just that organic, just go with it and react. And that's most of what the classes are, I feel like, is just getting you to get outside of your head and just respond to what the scene is. And a lot of it is establishing what is the scene that you're having your head to present to the other player, so that they understand what it is, and then they can take and flow with it, and then you kind of play back and forth. It's interesting, and I feel like it lends to real life. I think I had the first experience this week. I teach a class for the local law enforcement agency, and we had some problems at the training center, and we had miscommunication about which classroom we were in, so I was totally set up, had to move classrooms. And it's 7 o'clock, like I'm supposed to start class at 7. And instead of starting class, we're moving classrooms. So I get to the second classroom, get everything set up, all the way to the point of, turn on projector. Turn on projector. Nothing. Hey, you know how to work? No, I don't. Okay. So we end up moving to the third classroom. And like normally I'd probably be pretty frustrated and just like, this is a public safety training center. Like of all places you'd think this would be the easy place to teach.
Yep.
And like most places, purpose built, it has its challenges and problems. But by the time I got to the third one, I just felt, I kind of went back to the improv thing. Like, what can I do right now? Like, how do you just go with what's presented? And it was so much more relaxing and just no anxiety.
Yeah.
We'll make it happen. We'll figure it out. Let's rock and roll. And the class went really smooth.
Yeah.
But you also realize, like, hey, I can introduce myself without a PowerPoint.
Right.
I don't have to have all the pretty pictures and that stuff. I can do this just standing here. It works. So, yeah, it's what was funny is up till a couple of weeks ago, I was like, I don't really feel like I'm seeing areas in my life where it's carrying over other than performing. So I'm starting to be a little more conscious of, okay, maybe I am picking up some things here.
We got two new best friends over there.
They both look pretty cozy.
Yeah, they do. So with the gentleman that you were talking with at Rudy's, do you remember what your mindset was when you went into that conversation?
That's a good one.
Or was
what I seem to recall thinking is he was senior to me, and I remember thinking, this is a guy from LA Fire. I don't know if it was county or city. Either one, he's probably got, in my mind, way more experience than I do. It's one of the things I've had to come to terms with the last few years is I actually have some experience to share and pass on. But I would say it was one of curiosity. Like, hey, what is some of your experience? How do you guys do things? How does it differ from what we do? And I forget, he had actually engaged with me based on the uniform, and it was like, you're the fire department? Like, yeah, but you have a gun. Yeah, I'm an arson investigator. Why do you have a gun? In Texas, if you're an arson investigator, it means you're a fire investigator that has police powers. So that when you're investigating a fire on the municipal side, if you find that there's a criminal event involved, then you can carry forward with the criminal side of it, including arrest and all that stuff. So,
and when you go into a conversation with someone who you suspect was involved in arson, what's your mindset then? Because you mentioned you get a little bit nervous, which I was surprised to hear you say, because you're not the one that committed the crime.
Yeah.
You haven't done anything wrong.
No, but and also that was back when I was fresh out of the academy and everything, and they drill into you, despite what, I'll stay out of the politics over all of it, but despite the common belief of, we just want to violate everybody's rights and do what we want to do, they try to drill into you during academy, like, people have rights. And A, it's not good for your career to violate those. B, you're not going to get a successful prosecution if you violate them. So for me, a lot of it is, am I doing this right? Am I asking the right questions? And this has happened many times. To get back to the office, my partner says, hey, did you ask him such and such? That's an obvious question I should have asked. No, I did not get their name. No, not quite that basic, but some of the questions, like, oh, hey, did you happen to ask? No, I didn't. It was too in my head.
Yeah.
And now, so someone gave me, I thought it was a really good idea. And it's sometimes hard to actively put yourself in this mindset, but it was one of saying, hey, instead of trying to find the evidence that makes someone guilty, work to help them prove their innocence. Because if they're truly innocent, you can do that. If they're not, same thing. You can't prove innocence if you're not innocent. So it's, hey, tell me the story. And my job is to verify that. So if it's the epitome of that, like, tell me the story. I'm going to verify it. I'm going to find all the information that I can to verify that you're innocent. If it doesn't line up, then we're going to have another conversation. And I'm going to keep digging, and I'm going to keep digging. I'm going to keep pushing until we get to the point of either the information is so much so that I can look at it and say, hey, man, you can tell me all day long that you didn't do it, but here's what the information says. Or you finally crack and just admit it.
Could we how would this go if we pretended like I was under suspicion of arson? Could you give me an example of what kind of questions you would ask to prove that I am innocent, or to help me prove my own innocence?
Um, it's so situationally dependent. I mean, it would be fun to play with. I haven't done a whole lot of interview training yet. Um, that's good. That's a good one. I would say we'd have to build out a little bit more of a scenario to do that with. Like, say we had a.
Was there any particular fire, like 5, 10, 15 years ago that you remember some of the circumstances that it's so long in the past we could sort of give some of the details of what happened without.
I've only been doing it like 4 years, but
a fire from 4 years ago,
yeah.
from 3 years and then 9 months ago.
So that actually brings up an interesting point in that, and I hate to burst bubbles, but you know, the movies and the shows are awesome. You know, fire investigator goes in and, you know, digs through the ashes and pulls forth information that reveals that the fire was started here in this way. I wish it happened that way more often.
Stop the madness.
It'd be a lot more fun.
It's not just like TV.
It's not, unfortunately. Yeah, it's pretty rare. What I'm finding, and you know, my coworkers, if they see this, God forbid, can correct me, but what I'm finding more and more is that your dig is just supporting information, usually to the story that you get. I would say by and large, and again, back to the interview process, it's digging for that story, and it's really looking at all the facets. It's talking to all the people that you can, because you might pull out one little tidbit from somebody that is the turning point. And it really is for me, the fascinating part is, and this is where I personally, I'm not big on the whole Big Brother's watching you. The things that we get from Big Brother as far as cell phone evidence and all that stuff, that's rarely what's going to solely get you. It's the information that we have to have in order to get access to that information is a whole other ballgame in and of itself. By the time we get to actually being able to get cell phone information to show where you've been, we already have, you know, they call probable cause. You have to already have to have other information that says, yeah, you likely did it. And now we're just proving, we're supporting that. But again, that comes back to the interview process. Like, hey, where were you this night? Oh, I was over here. And they teach you in interview stuff that people get really vague on when you start really getting down to the point that differs, or where the story changes from reality. You know, and people can be really good with details. And you keep coming back to it, and you just keep hitting it from different directions, and eventually you'll start seeing misalignment of those details, because it's hard to keep track if it's not reality.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, a lot of it would just be, you know, some fun things that it come down to is like, hey, you know, what did you have for dinner last night? Do you remember in detail?
Oh, I do. I ordered, I forget, well, actually, no, I don't. I already forget the name of the restaurant, but it did stand out to me because it was Friday night, and it's been a long week, and so I ordered seafood. I love seafood. I also don't feel like going out by myself. I went through the Rolodex in my head. I was thinking, is there anyone that I could hit up right now that'd be free for dinner? Probably not. So we DoorDashed some seafood. I got crab, corn, potatoes, and a hard-boiled egg, and it was freaking delicious.
Yeah.
But yeah, I already forget the name of the restaurant.
Huh. What time did you order?
7:30.
How do you know that?
I'm guessing.
Okay. Do you have some way to show it, like prove that?
I ordered through DoorDash.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you have like a receipt on the DoorDash you could show me?
I do.
Okay. Would you mind showing me that?
Sure.
Okay. Because even within the law, it's like, I have to have your permission to even look at your phone if you're going to show me a receipt on there. So that's kind of where I would go with that. It's like, hey, man, would you mind showing me that receipt? And then, you know, and so I might be where it gets sometimes gamey is that, you know, I don't know if they have a time on there of when they actually delivered.
Right.
So I might be asking you to see the receipt to show that you ordered at 7:30, where I might be actually looking at to see when did they actually deliver. Because that fire could have been whenever. And if that's your alibi, I want to see, okay, if you were here to get that, then obviously you couldn't be next door starting a fire maybe, but could you have it in the meantime? And again, it's so situational that you just have to look for those little angles and dig into it. And that's the stuff I'm still learning to figure out on the fly.
Yeah.
And it's also, how do you come across as friendly and nice, even though you're trying to gather information? And that's, for me, what I'm finding is that when I'm in the mindset of help me help you show that you're innocent, it's a whole different vibe, really, than I think you're guilty and I'm trying to prove it.
Right.
Which I think tends to let people open up more. And unfortunately also trips them up if they are guilty.
Yeah.
If you're good at it, which I'm not professing to be good at it. and we don't get a lot of like true just good interviews like you see on the videos where we're sitting in the room and grilling them for hours.
Yeah.
Like I guess that would be fun, but we get to do some training with again the major law enforcement agency here, and hearing about interviews that take hours upon hours. And I think one class we were in, the detective talked about he went like 2 hours and 15 minutes being silent.
Really?
Yeah.
And he stayed in the room?
Yep.
And he was just waiting?
Yep. Because silence makes people uncomfortable.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. So you just sit and ask a question and wait. And people want to fill that space. And he said it took 2 hours and 15 minutes.
And so in that particular circumstances, he asked a question, and the individual just took that long before they finally said anything.
Yeah.
Or
before they finally actually said anything of use. Yeah, and I like a buddy of mine. I've got a mentor from out of state. He's talked about you just sit there and just let them talk, and that's the hard part. Especially he's talked about it's almost harder to let them start talking and then just not respond, because they'll say something and then they're waiting for you to respond and they get uncomfortable and they got to fill that space. And usually he says they'll start filling in more and more detail unknowingly just because they're uncomfortable, or they'll contradict their story.
Yeah.
So yeah, and all that stuff, like I'm still learning. Actually, I think I've got my first actual class in September. It's sometimes getting training's a little hard to come by, but
if you start a podcast and do 50 episodes, you'll get a lot better.
Yeah. Just talk. Put a mic in front of a suspect's face. Here, let's just treat this like a podcast. Have a seat.
Yeah. Let's go back in time a little bit. What's a piece of context that you think we would need from your past to understand who you are today?
My biological father was a POS. Yeah, my biological father got dishonorable discharge from the Navy. He's that kind of person. I only lived with him for 3 years of my life, and I refer to it as my 3 years from hell. So yeah, we were talking earlier about just not having a lot of strong male influence when I was growing up. Not until who I call my dad is my adopted father, and he arguably probably helped get me on a reasonably good path where I could be successful and have a chance to kind of step back and look at life and just say, hey, I don't understand a lot of this stuff, but I'm going to figure it out.
Yeah.
And it's taken some therapy over the last few years to kind of come to that realization of I'm apparently actually a pretty intelligent person. It's just where my intelligence has been applied is not normally where most people are learning these things as they grow. And I've had to apply a lot of it to just figuring life out. Even 5 years ago, I was very socially kind of inept, or at least extremely awkward. Grown a lot in that area. A lot of it's just been observation. I would say a lot of it's been fire department too, because they have a way of setting you straight if you're not being appropriate. Even if it's like I ran into this fire, I was a very angry child. I never really initiated fights, but I could be violent. I would hit things, not typically people. I've only hit people probably twice, and both times it scared the crap out of me. So I had learned, I was in high school when I was in Alaska. The kids I lived with, they all liked to make fun of me, and it'd get me upset. I'd get just, enraged, mad. And I finally asked, I was living with a family up there, and I asked their son, I was like, why is it that y'all just keep digging and digging? He's like, because it's funny. When you react, it's funny. I said, so you guys do this just because it's entertaining to you? He's like, yeah. I said, so if I just don't react, then it's not entertaining anymore. It's like, yeah, I guess so. Okay. So I just stopped reacting. And what I learned was that when I got to a point where it was just getting out of control was to remove myself from the situation and find a quiet place, whatever, to kind of down-regulate now. And I carry that forward with the fire department. And fire department culture is very much in that, how do we establish trust quickly? Because you have somebody on your crew or knew somebody on your crew, you've got to be able to establish that trust for the job. And a lot of that is accomplished through kind of razzing people. I think people on the outside look at it as harassment or hazing. I think there's a fine line between kind of pushing people's buttons and hazing, but you do a lot of things to kind of push your buttons and see how people react, and you find out what their boundary is. And so I was on a crew for I think 6 years, and a couple of guys on that crew that were really good at pushing buttons, and I would react, and I would just do what I always did. I would kind of remove myself, go be quiet, until one day my officer came in and wouldn't let me drive the rescue that day at a special operations station, and I love to drive, and rescue's a lot of fun to work on, so I was a bit crushed. I'll give him credit, my entire career that he was at least professional and kind enough to pull me aside and have a conversation with me about it. And he said, this is the reason you're not driving, because I don't know where your head's at. And I've got to be able to trust the person that's driving that vehicle in these situations, and the crew has to be able to trust them. And what ended up coming out of it, he said, your reactions kind of scare the crew, because you get really quiet, and from our perception, you're getting kind of dark, and you're withdrawing, and we don't know what to expect of you. And I was mortified. Like, it's not at all. It's like, I'm actually trying to downregulate and be cool and like come back engaged. And that, wow, no, that's the perception you're getting is not at all how I feel. Like, he's like, well, you got to change. Like, they're looking for you to kick back a little bit, like in a healthy way, because they're doing it because they want you as part of the crew, and it's a brotherly thing. Oh, really? Okay. So a couple of dinners later, and we're sitting there drying dishes, and my back is to the guy that liked to dig into me for a while sometimes, and he said something, I don't remember what it was, and I started to feel myself bristle up, and then I kind of heard my boss saying, hey, they want you to react, like respond to them, like kick back a little bit. Okay. So I took a deep breath and I said, hey, so-and-so, yeah, fuck you. Hey, dude, he did. He put the plate on the counter. He turned his head and he looked at me and just smiled. And he says, about goddamn time. And I was like, that's it? That's all it took? Really? Okay, cool. And it kind of became a running joke for a while. And that transferred into the other guy I worked with, who is known in the department for being able to push buttons. And he's an expert at pushing you to the very edge of your boundary. And as a guy that he's Mormon, and I finally asked him one day, I was like, where did you do your mission? He said, in Vegas. Huh. I said, that explains so much. And I asked him one day, I said, some days I'm just not in the mood for it. Like, what do I have to do to get you to stop? He said, just tell me to stop. Oh, like, communicate?
Right.
What is this thing? Okay. So next time I came in, I was just not having it that day. I was like, Brad, I just need a break, man. Just give me 30 minutes, whatever. But I'm not in the mindset for it right now.
Yeah.
Okay. Just be bopping along. And I'll tell you, we worked together for 6 years, and we're still buddies. I mean, that man will give me the shirt off his back if I need it. And he's got 5 kids to deal with, and we still hang out on occasion and still talk. And it went from this guy that he's always pushing my buttons to, I think, consider him a lifelong friend.
Nice.
So yeah, it's been a fun road on learning how to communicate and how to process those feelings differently, and all the above. I'm still learning, man. It's as soon as you stop learning, it's not, you've missed something.
Yeah. Where were you born in Texas?
No.
Where were you born?
Actually born in Maryland. I'll give you the rapid rundown.
Give me the rapid rundown.
All right, born in Maryland, moved to Chicago with my mom when I was somewhere between 0 and 3. I think it was like 6 months. I was in Chicago till about 3. Moved to California in the Bay Area with my biological father's parents, my grandparents. Ended up being with them through various circumstances. Long story short, stayed with them until I was 7. My biological father came back from Italy in the Navy with a new wife and a new child. So I flew cross country at the age of 7 by myself to Virginia Beach and spent the next 3 years with him. When I was 10, I went to Chicago to visit my mom, who was dating, at the time was dating who I now call my dad. Went to visit for Christmas and made the comment that I wish I didn't have to go back. And they asked me, "Are you serious?" I said, "Yeah, I'm pretty miserable. And it's not a good environment, kind of a somewhat violent environment. There were other things going on that we figured out later that were totally not cool. That still has affected some lives pretty extremely. So I ended up staying in Chicago with my mom and who's become my stepdad. When I was 12, I asked him to adopt me and become my dad. And then when I was in Chicago roughly 10 till 16. When I was 12, my mom woke up one morning and was like, "We need to go to church." "Oh, what is this church thing you speak of?" So we started going to church, and that evolved into getting involved in a church group that had communities all over the world, but in the wilderness. Revelations, it talks about leave the world and run to the wilderness. And so they did literally. And I had heard about a farm in Alaska, and we had the family friend that kind of got us involved with this church. Knew the people up there, and I'd been bugging her. I was like, I want to go to Alaska, Teenager, get to go to Alaska, that'd be awesome. And I ended up going to Guatemala and Venezuela for a total of 3 weeks between the two with a minister and a couple of friends, or a couple other young people. And when I got back from that, the family friend that we knew had contacted the folks in Alaska and said, "Hey, I think it would be a good time for him to at least come visit for the summer." Unbeknownst to me, she had actually asked for them to consider me staying for school. I was getting involved with a not great crowd in Chicago. Was kind of working down the path of becoming a chef. And that was the segue to go to Alaska, because the community that I went to ran a concessionaire for the state. So Princess Cruise Lines, Holland America, all of them would bring their cruise or their tour buses in. And this place, what the farm did is they made everything from sandwiches from scratch, pies from scratch, all these baked goods from scratch. And I was going to go up there and work in the restaurant and learn that stuff. Again, unbeknownst that the request had been made to consider me staying for school. So here's this kid from Chicago, really not a whole lot of guidance growing up, still pretty angry, prime of my, youth and girls and all that becoming a thing. Went to work in a restaurant and apparently got along with the girls a little too well. So they took me out of the restaurant and had me work at the greenhouse, where I took care of like 1,400 tomato plants day in, day out with nobody else. It was not the funnest thing. However, I met my best friend up there. My best friend and I became best friends juggling. Long story short, he saw me juggling, asked me about it. I kind of gave him the primer on here's how you do it. And I'd left for the summer. When I came back, he was juggling and was like, "I did this, but then you did this other thing. How do you do that?" I'm like, because a lot of people ask, "I want to learn how to do that." And you teach them, they just don't want to put the time in.
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Well, you just do this." Okay. A couple days later, he come back and he had it. I was like, "Oh, this is kind of cool. Like, well, what else do you want to do?" And by the end of the 2 years in high school, we were best friends. That's a whole fun story on how I even ended up there. But basically, I was the kid from Chicago, had an attitude. I swore at some other kids and told them if they were, again, one of those kids that was like to push buttons. And I just said, "You do that again, I'll beat the fucking shit out of you." On a Christian farm in the middle of Alaska, you don't say that. You certainly don't say that to the grandson of the head pastor.
What happened because of that?
That's when I was informed that the request had been made for me to stay for school. And I was told that there was no way He didn't directly say no way in hell, but I inferred that as there's no way in hell you're going to stay here. And to a quote, he said, unless you hit your knees and pray to God and something changes. Like, yeah, okay. Honestly, it's probably the only time I've ever really actually hit my knees and prayed hard and just like, what am I supposed to do here? And I don't claim to be super religious now. I feel like I had my period. Whether I get back to it, I don't know.
In the moment, why do you think you were okay with that request versus telling him to F off and going back to Chicago? Or, what caused you to comply, do you think?
So I was being homeschooled my first 2 years of high school, and that wasn't good for me. And I think internally I knew that. I don't know that I had the wisdom back then to say this is why. I just knew that I wasn't happy. I was, getting overweight. I swam as a kid. I was a diver as a kid. I look back at the pictures. I was in shape, and mentally I thought I was fat. And that carried over. And then homeschooling, I didn't have in Chicago area. I didn't have access to the sports and all that. So when I went to Alaska, it was like, oh, here's a social group. Here's a peer group that I can actually interact with. It's beautiful. There's outdoors, all this stuff. I don't know. Something about it was just like, now that you say that, I feel like it would be a better environment for me to be here for school. And if it can work out, I'm down for it. And he was right, though. There's something needed to change. My attitude, my whatever, something needed to change. So,
what kind of crowds were you getting involved with when you were still in Chicago?
I started dating a girl who was from South Africa. Beautiful, beautiful girl. Her name was Bettina. I still love her name. But she made it well known that she had picked me over the head drug guy for the area.
Wonderful.
It kind of scared me. Yeah.
I'm assuming you weren't best friends with this guy. Individual.
No. I still don't even know who he was, but I was like, that just doesn't sound like a good thing. And it was one of those things I think I was headed down a road that I didn't know or realize, and I think the adults that were in my life recognized it before I even really knew. And this particular woman in my life, she's known my mom since she was young, since my mom was a teenager. She held me as a baby, so I think there's just that connection. And it's funny, I tell people that if there's anybody, Christian person I've ever met that would kind of go towards convincing me that that's the way to go, it's this woman. She's just very genuine. I don't know that there's a judgmental bone in her body. She's just loving to everybody. And I think even right now, if I called her right now, she would be nothing but welcoming and, happy to hear from me. I might have to send her this podcast just so she knows I feel that way. But I've always said, if there's anybody that I think was a good example of what Christianity should be, I think it's her. So there's a part of me that just says I think there's something that she saw that just knew. And she also knew my mom for many years. Looking back, I think my mom had a lot of mental health challenges, certainly had a lot of physical health challenges. And what's funny is through therapy, for years I thought my dad was violent and all that stuff, and that's the source of my problems. There's a lot of things that come back to stuff with my mom, just being mentally oppressive, and that was a term that was finally put on it by a therapist. He was like, "Oh, everything you're talking about, you grew up in a very oppressive environment. What does that mean?" I'll have to go home and look that up.
Is that why you moved in with your biological father's parents for a time?
I have a feeling that if I could go back and look at the reality of the circumstances, yeah, I think that probably is how that happened.
What's your relationship like with them?
There is none.
There is none?
Yeah, there's nothing on my biological side.
How old with your dad?
He's deceased.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah. Which, my biological is deceased, who I call my dad, David, he passed away at 45 from cancer. Pretty sudden. He got diagnosed, they gave him a week. He made it 8 months.
Wow.
I'm sorry, not 45, 43. He was 43 when he died. That's why I've got the long hair, much to the chagrin of many people. I've got a pretty handful of people that died from cancer in the last few years, and he was kind of the start of it. So policies changed at work, which allows me to grow it out. And it's probably one of the most polar things I've ever done, because some people really like it, other people don't. Not run into many people that are in between. So the hard part is there's one particular chief at work who definitely doesn't care for it, and he's been pretty vocal about it. And when I told him that part of the reason why I'm doing it is very closely associated to someone he knew that passed away from cancer just a couple of years ago, one of my former captains, he kind of did the, oh man, now you're making me feel bad. Like, well, it'd be good of you to ask maybe if someone has a reason why they're doing something rather than just assume that they're going with the trends and stuff. But I definitely have a reason for growing it out.
Yeah.
If anybody's ever grown their hair out, it's not the easiest thing. you learn a lot of things.
I can attest to this.
Yeah.
It is not easy to grow your hair out.
No. Absolutely. And my running joke now is like, well, my partner at work is bald. And I'm like, I'm just offsetting the hair quotient.
There you go. There you go.
So yeah, and that's the catch, and that's part of why I only had 6 years with him. Is that and really I had probably about 12 total like involved in life before he passed away. But I'll tell you what, the circumstances around me leaving Alaska and coming back they were living in Colorado at that point. The timing of it was absolutely perfect. Came back, he got diagnosed in January. I was there. I was in EMT school. Got to be there for his last 8 months, and was in a capacity that we had time to spend together and have some pretty special moments together, just talking about life and going for hikes in the mountains of Colorado and just talking. It was awesome.
What were the 3 years like that you lived with them when you were in Virginia Beach?
I spent a lot of time in my room. Got grounded for just about everything and anything, to the point that my stepmom would let me go out during the day just because she knew I need to get outside. But it was pretty much understood that like you go play, you don't talk about it, and you're back in by whatever time you need to be back in. So that when he got home, I'd been in my room all day. And when he would ground you, it wasn't you're grounded to the house; it was you're grounded to your room, and you shall not come out unless you have to go to the bathroom or eat. Punishments were pretty physical, wire hangers and bear skin, and just not fun. And that's what's funny is that some of that stuff I downplay, and I'm like, I know people that had it far worse. Got the ever living crappy out of them. It's like, okay, I got spankings with wire hangers, got confined in my room, but that still has an effect on you.
Yeah. And how old were you for those 7 to 10 years old?
Yeah.
Do you, it's oftentimes on this podcast we do talk about our childhoods, and it seems like most people 5 to like 10ish starts to get pretty foggy, and like 5 and below is almost non-existent. For you, are those 3 years still pretty vivid in your mind, or is it more bits and pieces and moments that are memories?
I would say more event oriented.
Yeah, sounds about
certain
right.
things that happened that I did. I did a fair bit of stealing then.
Really?
Yeah.
What would you steal?
I'd steal candy and stuff from 7-Eleven. The worst I got at that age, at 8, 9, 10, I stole a model, like a car model, like the plastic models you put together in paint. Yeah. I stole the model in the paints. And I'm pretty sure, looking back, thinking, I'm pretty sure the store owner knew it, because he questioned me on it, and I made up some story, like, no, I already had the model, I'll just come for the paints or whatever, and I don't know what it was, but I don't know if there was something about me that he's just like, it's just, I guess this kid needs it or whatever. I don't know, but I remember that was the most significant thing I'd stolen. But yeah, I would steal candy and stuff, and that extended into when I was in Chicago. I got caught in the local grocery store, and undercover cop who told me later that he had actually, part of why he became a cop, because he got caught shoplifting when he was young, and it had an impression on him, and he ended up becoming a cop. But funny, not funny, was that he stopped me, he takes me in the back, he says, I need you to return that candy bar at you, have it up your sleeve. Okay. I wasn't brash, I was scared shitless, and here you go. We get in the back, he says, all right, I'm going to give you an opportunity, so if you have anything else, you need to return it. here's your opportunity. Oh, okay. Well, pulling shit out everywhere. And he totaled it all up in candy and like the little gem donut stuff. It was like almost $15 worth of stuff that I had on me. And he stopped and he said, Jesus. He says, I only saw you put the one candy bar up your sleeve. Yeah. So I ended up was not allowed back in that grocery store without an adult until I was 18. And I ended up leaving Chicago anyway, or that area anyway. So, but yeah, like stuff like that stands out. I used to go ride my bike around the golf course in the morning just because listening to, of all things, Huey Lewis in the news on tape. Yeah, it's stuff like that is what stands out, and I really wonder if it's just because those were moments of like true freedom and just I could forget what was going on or the everyday stuff. So,
what were you angry about?
At that point, I wasn't. I think it was after I left there I was angry. And honestly, I think a lot of it, learning what I'm learning for having a kid now, I don't know that I was angry about anything so much as I'd never learned to handle emotions appropriately. I never had somebody sit me down and say, it's okay to be angry about this, but responding in the way you're responding is not appropriate. And this is how you should handle that. I think that was the part that I missed, and that's the part that extended in a lot of other things. I just never learned those skill sets. It was never taught, or most people learning that from their parents and from society that they're around, where I was so closed off from it. I just never had those lessons. And that was revealing. You're sitting in therapy and you're like, well, hey, it's when your therapist for your own job basically tells you, if I'm being honest, clinically speaking, it's amazing you've done in your career and with your life what you've done given the environment you grew up in. Because most people that are lacking those skill sets just don't do that.
Yeah. She's
like, but you're intelligent enough that you were able to step back and make observations and adjust on your own. And she's like, that's kind of rare. Up to and including on Alaska. Like the psychological therapist view of that is that I basically created my own family that worked for me. That I was getting to learn from and got myself into an environment where I learned these things and grew. So arguably it saved my life. In a lot of ways, being on a Christian farm in the middle of Alaska, guess what you're not exposed to much? Like drugs and alcohol and all that stuff. And so I think in that age where I would have been really impressionable by all that stuff, I wasn't. And therefore, it's never really been an issue for me. I've never been a heavy drinker. Like, I enjoy alcohol. But it's never been a crutch or never been through that party stage of just getting raging drunk all the time. Had my moments, but they've always been in very controlled environments and environments that I knew were safe to do that.
Yeah.
Drugs have never been an issue. That's really fun when you're doing your interviews or you've never done, like not even weed. No, wasn't around it. When I was too scared because at that point I knew what I wanted to do for a living. So I knew that I probably shouldn't mess with that.
Yeah. He had a friend who got a fake ID, and he had a fake ID, and he also somehow got it on his record. I just remember between the fake ID and some involvement with marijuana, fast forward 10 years later, 8 years later, whatever amount of time it was, he wanted to join the police force. And he eventually got in, but man, did he have a heck of a time doing it.
Yep.
He would call me up after some instances and just sort of vent about what was going on and roadblocks he was hitting. And it's just hindsight 2020 for him. Why was I so impatient?
Yeah.
Just wait till you're 21,
Yep.
you know?
Yep.
Or go to a state where it's legal or
exactly.
something. So did you stay in Alaska through being 18 years old and completing high school?
Yeah, I finished high school there and I actually stayed for another 3 years of college. I had a small private college. Like my high school graduating class was 7. My college graduating class was 12.
Jeez, yeah, that's a small town indeed.
Yeah. And I had kind of discovered firefighting and public safety right towards the end of college, so I was happy to leave with my associates and start pursuing the firefighting and EMS part. And there was my first aid instructor up there gave me the best advice for my career was just, I love that you want to be a paramedic. I love that you want to go save the world. Whatever you do, go do it with the fire department. It's just a much better, in her opinion, much better quality of life, better retirement and everything. I think I accidentally got lucky ending up in Austin. And, especially with an agency that doesn't run frontline paramedics through the fire department. Austin's one of the few major cities that runs a third-party EMS still. And I enjoy medical. I don't think I was passionate about it, and I don't mind not doing all that stuff all the time.
What caused you to lean, whether it was paramedics or firefighters? What was making you lean in that direction?
Her advice and my grandparents and Chicago's neighbor, who was a fire chief for the local town, and I talked to him about it, and his suggestion was, he said, get your EMS training and all that. It's a lot easier to do than to get on the fire department. Get some experience with it, because that's the way the fire service is going, is primarily medical. I mean, last I knew in Austin, over 70% of our calls are medical. So he saw that comment and was like, hey, get experience with this. It'll just make your job as a firefighter a lot easier. And it's just easier to get in the EMS and medical than it is in a fire department. So I did that. Started chasing EMS, worked a psych intake ER. Fun stories there.
Ooh, tell us one.
I don't know if it's appropriate for a podcast. Actually, I think my favorite one, it's the one that it's not my favorite. My favorite's really probably not appropriate for the podcast. My second favorite one is the guy that had come in and very confidently told us that female aliens had abducted him and shoved things up his private parts in the sake of experiments. And yeah, it's strange. It doesn't seem abnormal, except that he looked at me straight, dead serious as could be, and he says, and I know you think I'm crazy telling you this, but I'm serious. I'm being honest. What do you say to that? You genuinely believe it, and not only that, but you're telling me that. You're telling me that I am thinking you're nuts, and yet to believe you.
Right.
And all I could think of was sir, I fully trust that is your reality. And he was cool with it. That was it. It's I will forever remember that line.
Yeah.
And I've used it within the past 4 years a few times. I firmly believe that as your reality. Because it is.
Right.
That's what you believe. And I believe that is what you believe. Now, as to whether it's actually real or not, that's not for me to judge. But I firmly believe that is your reality.
So after you did that for a couple of years, did that change any of your worldviews at all, or how you just navigate relationships with people, or was it just sort of a job and you maybe, for lack of a better term, enjoyed what you got to hear and you went home and at the end of the day it was what it was?
Probably more so that was one of my first jobs in the EMT, working as a tech there, and it was overnight in the ER, so that was always, you never knew what was going to come in. That was my first experience of realizing that I was adjusting to the job, because we had a CPR come in right as I was sitting down to eat dinner. And, hey, we need your help out here. Okay, come out. Put my fork down. My meal's still sitting there hot. Go out, pump chest for a while. They call it. I go back in, wash my hands, sit down, start eating again. And it wasn't until I was about done that I realized, that's not normal. Just stop eating, go do CPR, and come back and eat like it was nothing. It's just my job. And that's funny enough. I had told this class I was teaching this week, because I always throw a little piece in there hey, make sure you take your mental health. And one of the things I think the ER helped me realize before I realized it was that a lot of this job you have to keep objective. You have to treat it almost as that. That's just a patient. My job is to pump chest, and that's what my job is. When you start thinking about, oh, hey, that's someone's grandmother, and now their kids are without a mother, and their grandkids don't have a grandmother, and no one expected this, and how sad is that? That's when it starts. For me, that's when it starts affecting me emotionally and such. And I would say consistently the calls that I've had where it's become personalized like that, or I call it subjective, is when I have the battles with the PTSD or whatever. And I don't believe and I've actually been tested on it. I don't have really anything PTSD related to work. Funny enough, she said, no, your childhood, you probably got some stuff to work on. I thought that was pretty funny. She's 20 years of seeing all this, disaster and everything. She's like, no, you're good. your childhood, however you could.
It still haunts you a little bit.
Yeah. That's when I really kind of started like, oh, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Because it is. Sometimes I feel bad because it's like I don't understand some of the people that have the PTSD responses to our job, and just that true, like to the point of attempting suicide and such. And I don't say that in the sense of I don't get you. Why would you do that? It's I genuinely I think it's tragic that you can get to that point. I don't want to see anybody do that. I've lost more coworkers than I can count right now to suicide. One, if you all saw in the news, one pretty recently. But I personally don't. I've never gotten to that point of just being like, I can't handle what I've seen.
Yeah.
I figured out a pretty definitive process for myself on how to handle those things when I do get there. And I've had moments where I'm like, okay, this one's affecting me. I need to do something to address it and actively address it. My process is very weird.
What's your process?
I knew I shouldn't have gone there. I make this public, right? I will take a hot bath, drink a bottle of wine, and let myself cry.
There you go.
There it is. Discovered it totally by accident. One of my first major calls out in Bastrop when I was a volunteer firefighter. And went home. Yeah, I was taking a bath. I was like, I don't want a bottle of wine. And I just pulled that loose and let it go.
Yeah.
And never really had an issue with it afterwards. So when I run into those calls now, I almost actively do that because it just seems to work for me. And it's almost like, hey, cool. This is embarrassing. It might be or whatever, or unmanly, whatever you want to call it. It works for me and it keeps me sane in my head. And the last one significant one I had was I was actually the officer on the truck, and I told my crew, I said, I need a minute before we even left scene, and I just sat on the back and just kind of let it go a little bit. When I got back on the truck, I told him, I said, this one's going to hit me hard, and sorry if I'm quiet, but I got to process through this one. This one's near and dear. And sparing all the details, it was a young child, very close to my son's age, just out having a good time playing in their backyard in a pecan tree, self-shed, and clocked the child in the head. And last I knew, she's a vegetable. And what gets me is not that the child was, the effects on the family, is just the randomness of it. Yeah. There's nobody's fault. Nobody, what do you do? That's what pecan trees do. And to line up with a child's head and cause that, can't control that. On the flip side, for me, it was also a moment where years and years of training all came together. So we walked up to that child and I saw the presentation. I told my crew, I said, skip all the normal stuff, skip all the crap that we do at the beginning. This is what's going on. Let's get our package. Let's go. And I went straight out to EMS when they pulled up and said, this one's bad. Basically told EMS in not a nice way, get your asses moving. This is legit. This isn't just a kid that, they're hurt. These are the symptoms we had, and you could see the look on their face just change. And it's okay, let's get after it. So, and that's a prime example. In the heart of it, it was just focused. Boom, boom, boom. As soon as we got done, EMS drove off, and crews get back on the truck. It was this. It was just fuck. And it's one of the few patients I actually kept up with for a little while afterward. Got in touch with EMS, and they were one of the commanders over there. They have certain staff that will actually track patients if they can. So I was able to stay tracking on that one for about 2-3 months afterwards, which is why I know that the current condition's not favorable. So, and it caused a lot of issues for the family. My understanding is it actually resulted in them having to move just for care that is needed, ongoing care for the child. And that's sad. You hate to see that. But also part of the job.
Yeah.
And I think end of the day, what I hope people walk away with is find a way to address those things. Don't just shove it down. And if it's talking to somebody, great. If it's a weird process like mine, do it.
One of my buddies drives to a field and yells.
Nice.
I don't know if it's the same field every time, or if they're now that I'm thinking out loud about it, or if he has maybe a multitude of fields.
Yeah.
But he was telling me once, he's like, people in like movies and TV shows and whatnot, they make it look like sort of silly to like, find a pillow and yell into it. But he's like, for me, I just need to go yell and stomp around for a little bit and just sort of be in that open space. And then sometimes I'll sit there and just be in the silence for a few minutes after I'm done yelling.
Yeah.
And then I get back in my car and I go about my day.
Yeah.
So
it almost works so well you feel guilty. Like, that's it?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go. Let's on with my day.
And then similar to you, one of my ex-coworkers, she told me she did have a specific parking lot where she would go to and she would just cry.
Yeah.
Because she hated people seeing her cry, but she knew she needed to.
Yeah.
And
That's
so,
why I stick to the bathtub at home.
well,
It's the wine. It's not the emotions. It's
right,
the wine.
Right. It's the wine. It's the perfect scene.
I mean, the whiskey, the bottle of whiskey.
The bourbon. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. You mentioned one thing I didn't want to gloss over is cave rescues.
Yeah.
What was your role at the time? Were you a firefighter, or what was going on that you were doing cave rescues?
I got into cave rescue through special. I spent 11 years in special operations on AFD until I got sideways with some leadership, I guess.
AFD is Austin Fire Department.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. Wonderful 11 years. Got a lot of great experiences out of that. A lot of learning. And so they do more than 2 hands full of disciplines and special operations, but one of them being technical rope rescue stuff. And our proteges before us had somehow got tied into some cave rescue training, primarily because it requires super lightweight, like low drag operations. And just like SF in the military, when you're low drag, high speed, you've got to know your stuff. And the cost of the training is actually very reasonable for what you're getting. Got into it, enjoyed the rope rescue side of it. I was like, I want to do more, do this rescue stuff or this cave rescue stuff. I went to that and I was like, this is cool. Like I like the confined space act. To me, cave rescue combines all the disciplines in special operations. It's confined space. It's low drag, high speed, like medical care. It's the real technical rope aspect of it. There's in Texas caves. There's actually some hazardous environments because of the way caves are made here. This time of year, they'll be full of CO2, which is disassociates from the limestone as it dissolves. The geology of it's pretty interesting. That's what really got me on. I made a friend at Colorado Bend State Park who's the resource manager. And he wanted to go caving, but they have to have 2 to go. So we'd go up there, and like Colorado Bend State Park was my vacation home for a few years. We'd go up there and go caving, and we're underground, and it made it into this one cave that's got known bad air, but it cycles through the year. And we were right on the edge of when it might be bad or not. So we crawled back there. It's like, it's a little thick, but we're still good. We're laying in this room, and he's a degreed biologist from UT, and he's sitting there. He's pointing out these features in the rock, and so I'm like, that's cool, man. That's really cool. He's like, yeah, and then there's got this and this. Yeah, that's neat. And all of a sudden it dawned on me that we both sounded like we were high. I've never been high, but we sure sounded like it. I was like, hey man, I think we should probably go. Yeah, I think you're right. So we leave. But him showing me just the geology side of it, like got me outside of just the rescue side. So I've kind of enjoy the caving side of it too, and have been pursuing that a little bit more outside of the rescue side. But yeah, started teaching. We do a seminar every January here in Texas. It's a week long. It's 9 days, 80 hours. It's a busy week, but we stay on site. We camp on site. Food is provided on site. Probably the greatest food you'll ever have at a seminar. Most people complain that they actually gain weight at the seminar. It's the community has been fantastic. I've gotten to teach, I think I did the math on like 7 different states. Got friends around the nation that I can probably call up and just say, hey, I'm coming to visit you. Can I crash with you? Yeah. How long are you going to be here? 2 weeks? Sure, fine, cool. Give you the key to the house. We might not be here, the first week or whatever, but so yeah, I've got Colorado in particular, I got some friends that have been at their place a few times, and they're in the foothills, and it's absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
But yeah, getting to travel around with that, the kind of, it's a small world. It's a very, very small contingent of people that like that sort of thing. But they're like family, and they're weirdos like me, and I enjoy it. I enjoy the challenge of it. So it's been fun. And, I've been getting him into caving. We actually went to Mexico last November for Thanksgiving. And went up to there's a national park there. It's all mountainous forest. Went up there for 3 days and didn't see another person other than the group we were with.
Yeah, yeah.
First night we're there, clouds roll in through camp, and it's raining. Rained for like 2 days straight. And we're just out there dropping in the holes and finding new caves. We found 2 new caves. He found a borehole that was just big enough for him to fit into. We lowered him. So he climbs as well. We both climb. And so he slides down there. I've got a rope just kind of tied around his waist. Classic. This is totally what you should do in the middle of Mexico.
Right.
He slides down. He's like, yeah, about 5-6 foot, and then it kind of goes down this way and turns this way. And I can't see the bottom. I can see where the turn is. And he gets there and he's standing on the rock. He's like, looks like it goes down about 25 feet. Okay, well, our rope's about 33 feet. At the turn, we should be able to do this. We'll be right at the very end of it. Do you feel comfortable going? Yeah. Okay. He slides down. Yep. Doesn't go anywhere. It's just the bottom of the pit.
Yeah.
All right. Think you can get out? I sure hope so. Oh yeah, I'll be fine. So he climbs himself out, and I've just got the tension on the rope. He pops right out. I don't know that I've ever really admitted, but I was a little nervous.
Were you nervous? The answer was not really.
Not really.
Was it pitch black in there? You had a little bit of light.
Very, very bottom, yeah.
Were you nervous at all? No. He said
He was pretty confident about it. He popped right down and popped right out. I was like, okay.
You've been to a Crux by chance?
I have not been to Crux. I climb at Mesa Rim mostly.
Is that very similar concept?
Yeah.
Bouldering
It's a lot taller.
Okay.
Yeah, they have like 55-foot walls there.
There's some kids there who, I'm so bad at guessing kids' ages, but if I had to guess, probably like as young as 6 or 7 up until teens, and then the most rest of the crowd is adults. But it's funny because I'll see this 9-year-old, I'll try a certain route on the bouldering, and I get halfway up, and my forearms are killing me. I don't know where I should step next, so I just jump off. And then I'll move back to someone else on where I sort of debate, like, do I want to try this again or go move on? And this 9-year-old will walk up and just shimmy on up the thing. And I'm like, well, first off, they're probably a lot less afraid than I am because I never did anything like that growing up. So I to this day, I have a fear of like very tall ladders and whatnot. And even living on this mountain where I walk fad, like, I'll sometimes push my limits to how close can I get to the edge today. At 37 years old, that fear is still there. And I thought, this is awesome for these kids because they're probably never going to have that same fear that I have because they're just going up this 25-foot wall, no hesitation or anything. They just go for it.
He started out doing parkour. So like I think the climbing part is just like parkour or climbing's far more controlled and like deliberate. And ever since he was young, I've never been that dad where at the park was like, don't do that. It's just like, hey, think about the risks involved and what do you need to do to manage that. And if you need me to spot you, I still remember he's like, what does that mean? It means you're going to do it, but I'm going to be here to catch you if you need help, or I'll help you. And like, I'm not going to touch you, but my hand's going to be right here.
Yeah.
So if you fall, like, I'll help you down or whatever. So, and then the other rules, I would never pick him up onto something that he couldn't get to himself. So trees and all that, I've never picked him up into a tree. Came to regret that at cave rescue training, and I'm teaching a class. There's a kitchen window that looks out onto a tree, like the one tree in the middle of this parking lot. And, lecturing, talking, da 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 da. All of a sudden, I see Theo up the tree, bottom of the window, keeps going, past the top of the window. I'm like, where is he? We're going to take a break. Come back in 5 minutes. I got to find out where my kid is. He's just sitting up in the tree in the little crook, just watching the world, contemplating who knows what. It's like, okay, careful what you not wish for, but careful what you set up for. Like when you give them confidence, and I think a lot of it too is at that age they build that skill level as their bodies are growing and the skill set comes with it. So they've set it climbing. Like of all the kids there, he's probably the least fearsome.
Yeah, that's good.
Just gets on there and goes. And then that same trip, we actually ended up dropping him into a 70-foot borehole at night in the rain. It was fun. And we had some college students there that were fairly new to caving. And I used some of the rescue principles to lower them down there and haul them out. And in between, I actually rappelled down, hung out with him for a couple minutes, then climbed back out and set up the rope system to pull him out.
When you say borehole, you mean a hole dug by a bore?
No, it's basically just a big, very tall shaft straight into the ground.
Okay.
Like if a drill bit, like a large drill bit, just dug a hole and 70 feet deep, it's literally just a round. Usually down there, it's caused by water runoff, most likely.
Gotcha.
It's just runoff because the geology there is where the mountains, they have upheavals, so the mountains literally get pushed up. And there's all these plates of rock that eventually they peel off. So a lot of the caves around there are actually void caves. It's where all the rock has sat for years, and there's voids in between these huge, massive pieces of rock. And they've been there they're there so long that they actually end up fusing together, which I thought I never knew that. It was interesting. So you're finding all these voids basically between all this rock. And this particular one is probably most likely just water runoff. So it just drills a big hole in it. And you want to get to the bottom. It's 70 feet to the bottom, and you're hoping it goes somewhere fun, but it didn't. But dropped him down there. He's like, I think I'm done. It's like, well, I'm coming down to visit you. Okay. Jump on out, rappelled real fast down there, and I get to the bottom. How did you do that so fast? Well, it's a training, son. Yes. Yeah. Hung out, climbed out, set the system up to pull him out. And again, it's dark and it's raining by this point. And get him out. We all pack up and we leave. Next day, I'm talking to one of the college students. He was like, "Man, I got to tell you, it's like that was some of the coolest shit I've ever seen." I was like, "What?" Like, he's like, "How are you not scared out of your mind dropping your kid down there?" Like, oh, like I've been doing that for years. Like the stuff we did there, I do that in my sleep. Like it's no problem. I said I set it up in a way where I basically could have done all that by myself. You guys are just helping me. But it was funny. It's just like that was the coolest shit I've ever seen. It's like you're in college. There should be far more cool stuff you've seen than that. But thanks, man.
Perspective, I guess.
Yeah, it is. It is.
With 25 years in public service, what's either one of the craziest, weirdest, riskiest, scariest stories that comes to mind that you experienced? Could be a funny one. It could be, like I said, a weird one of just like, never thought I'd be doing this in my career. Anything in particular that comes to mind?
I don't. It's funny because I've wondered that myself. I don't feel like I've ever seen one particular situation that was just like, whoa. I really believe it, just like the rest of life. Like you end up facing these situations with a team. You know, we're the fire department. Most likely you got generally 3 other guys with you. Depending on the size of the scene, you're going to have multiple people there, and you're working this problem as a team. So I think sometimes you face that, and you're just like, okay, I've got my little chunk here. It's like like everyday life. How do you handle a water leak? Like that could be disastrous, right? But you just handle little pieces you can, and call them the people that do the parts that they do. So have there been some pretty significant moments for me? Yeah, some unique stuff. But a lot of those haven't necessarily been job related. It's just been, I was going to tell you earlier, like when my dad died, I was there when he died. I literally felt his last pulses. And as a new EMT, he was like, I think one of the first people that I actually watched die. But the weird part was that because I was an EMT, I knew to feel for that pulse, and I knew the moment he was gone. And his boss was there, who's a cardiologist. He's a physician. Guess what he can legally do? Declare time of death. So really randomly, weirdly, like my dad's time of death is very exact. I don't remember what it was, but I know that his time of death was very exact because his heart stopped. I looked at his boss, said, it's gone. And he looked at the clock and said, time of death at this time. Just really random.
Yeah.
But because of all the training and stuff and the situation, was in it. As far as just a really weird experience, one that kind of comes to mind, Hurricane Harvey was on Texas Task Force 1 for a while. I was a hazmat specialist. I just happened to be on the team that went to Port A the next morning, first boots on the ground, and pulling into Port A. There was a traffic jam of boats that we had to drive. And we got pictures of it. And it's roadway blocked with boats on trailers. Not boats that floated in from the water, because the dealership, all the boats on the trailers had floated down on the road and sort of weaving through it. I'm like, this is kind of apocalyptic. It had wiped out all forms of communication. The only form of communication we had was a landline telephone that was at City Hall. And I think the first 24 hours, that's all we had. Doing radio relays, and it drew on a lot of the training to be able to do stuff and to be able to communicate and make decisions kind of on your own that you knew would fit into the overarching goals while not getting yourself in trouble, because you knew if you got in trouble you didn't really have the communication to people to come help you.
Yeah.
So
this might seem like an obvious question, but what is your overarching goal when arriving to a scene like that?
For us, it's largely finding if there's any lives that are savable, that are so fundamentally Texas Task Force 1 is it's an urban search and rescue, but really I think skill set wise it's getting people out of collapsed buildings. A lot of it came from after earthquakes in California and then New York, of course, 9/11. At the heart of it, that is what their skill set is buildings collapsed and there's lives that are in there are savable. Let's find them, get to them, get them out, and do it safely. So they got canines and all that can smell living bodies and that kind of rubble, and hopefully zero you into it, and then figure out how to get to them and keep everything stable while doing so, and basically building a stable path for them to come out. So as a hazmat specialist, and it's interesting part is that as a hazmat specialist, my job is not to keep the public safe, it is actually to keep just the team members safe. So being aware of those environments that we're running into. So in the case of Hurricane Harvey, we're basically going door to door, checking structures and stuff to make sure there's nobody that needs assistance. A lot of it was searching RVs and stuff that were flipped over, making sure there's nobody inside that was injured that we needed to try to get. For me, I always tell people my most rewarding thing out of that whole deployment was a guy at Port A. There's a multi-story, I think it was a 5-story condo building. The gentleman was in his 80s, and he had weathered out the storm in his condo, and it had blown the roof off the building, so he ended up in his pantry with water draining in all through the night, in his 80s, and survived it. And we ran into him, like, hey man, you gonna head out? Because at that point, Harvey was supposed to turn back around and come back through Port A again. So it was like we were kind of this rapid, find everybody, and those that are still here, let's encourage them to get out of here.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, I don't really want to leave. And I said, well, this is what the storm's supposed to do. And he said, well, I can't get my car out because there's trees that have fallen in the drive. It's like, guess what? I have this radio thing, and I got people. They'll take care of that. We'll get you out. And he was still kind of hesitant. And I finally said, hey, man, does your family know you stayed? Yeah. So they don't know that you're still alive, do they? Well, no. I said, you think they're kind of wondering? Yeah, that's a good point. I would encourage you to get out and try to get a hold of your family. I would want to know.
That's a good.
Yeah.
I like what you did there.
Yeah, it was just kind of hey, let me give you a reason.
Let me give you some logic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing we did is I got his number and all that, and got his daughter's number, and actually was able to get information out to have somebody call her to let them know that he was still doing well and he was working on getting out, that he would contact them when he got out.
So his condo didn't have a roof on it anymore? Yeah. And he was still, and he had water pouring into it?
Yep.
Did he say why he wouldn't leave?
He was in the middle of the hurricane. He's probably the safest spot he could be at that point.
Or I meant by the time you guys got to him.
Or I guess some of it was because he literally couldn't get his car out because there were power lines down there. It was truly all the huge power lines that on your drive in from Corpus, those were all on the ground. And I'm sure I would imagine everyday Joe probably doesn't know if they're energized or not. But like even us going in, we were driving over the power lines, following all the utility guys going in trying to get stuff back up. But yeah, it was not a friendly environment to just be like, oh, I'm gonna hop in my car and go.
Right.
So they had this brilliant plan to have Facebook check in and everything, and then there's no internet because all the cell phone towers were down and everything.
Yeah.
Like we literally had a landline.
You mentioned 9/11. Did you help with that?
No.
No. Okay. I wasn't sure how far of reach the city had assistance with, given the what's the word I'm looking for?
Response or assistance.
Not the nature of the event, but it was such a big event. I wasn't sure if
It
was
was.
people coming in from all over to assist.
So I was still in Denver at the time of 9/11. I was still brand new. I mean, fairly. I guess I was a 2 or 3 year EMT at that point, because I was on a general transport ambulance. Yeah, because I remember that morning. But
I do too.
there are people from Austin that went. So my former captain, I was saying, died of cancer at secondary to 9/11. Is what they've attributed it to, which I can pretty strongly believe. So yeah, he went. I've got coworkers that were definitely there. I've got one chief, actually the chief over my shift. That was his first deployment with task force. That's a way to start.
Yeah.
So yeah, so yeah, there were definitely people. I mean, Texas Task Force 1 went to 9/11. Definitely had a part in that. I was not a part of it.
Fair. Did you end up finishing the book Alter Ego Effect?
Most of it.
What was your to the best of your recollection, what was your overarching takeaway from that one?
Still process that some days. The overarching for me is that almost task shifting is almost what I kind of view it as, but it's in what your focus and priority is, and for me, it's okay. When I go to work, I'm an arson investigator. Arguably a firefighter. We joke when you become an arson investigator, all the firefighters think you're a cop, and all the cops think you're not a real cop. You're just a fireman. So we're in this crazy gray area. So I just tell people I'm a gray man. I'm right stuck in the middle. But when I go to work, it's like I have this job and this task, and that's the priority. And what I'm finding is sometimes that requires a certain mindset. And often that mindset's not something I can go home with. Can't go home and start grilling my kid, and how I question him should and needs to be different than how I'm going to question suspects and such. I guess after what we talked about earlier, that's maybe arguable, but for me, it's becoming that when I go home and I'm with him, like that's my priority, that's my focus.
Yeah.
And to push all the other stuff out of my head unless there's something immediate that has to be addressed. But early on, it was always like, I've got this report I got to finish. Maybe I should sit down and do that. And my partner's our senior guy, so he was real good at breaking me of that. He's like, no, when you're off, you're off. Like, you take care of family, you take care of what you got to do. And so I would argue, to use current terms, it's made me much more present, for my kid. But I'm also noticing that also takes some of that, when you learn to let that go, it takes a lot of the stress away and the anxiety away, and you just say, hey, what are we going to do to have fun? What do we want to do?
Yeah.
Okay, let's do it. And so that's, I think it's part of what's contributed to change in our relationship, and just like when your kid runs up to you and gives you a hug and like, hey, I've missed you and looking forward to what we're going to do. I don't know, but let's figure it out. And let's do it together. I want to involve you in it. We decided last summer, we went to New Hampshire for a week, just he and I.
You take the RV?
No, I wish. I can't afford that. We flew.
Okay.
I rented a van with a tent on the top, a pop-up tent on the top. And my planning, the extent of my planning was getting to that area and getting the van. And I had it planned out, I think, the first night of where we were going to stay. And after that, we made it up every day. We never stayed in the same place more than one night for the entire week.
Heck yeah.
Had
It's
a,
very liberating.
it was absolutely amazing. I thought by the end of the week we would be, you know, at each other's throats and just like he'd be ready to go home see mom. I'd be just ready to, you know, not have my kid right next to me every day, day in day out. We had such a great time with it, and the last night we just kind of looked at each other like, I don't really want to leave tomorrow. This has been really cool. So with that said, currently the plan is to do a big trip every other year, every other summer. So I'm going to take them up to Alaska next summer and go visit the family I lived with up there
Nice.
in that community.
When was the last time you saw him? Been a while?
20 years.
That'll be fun.
Yeah.
That'll be awesome.
Yeah. By the time we get back up, I think it'll actually be close to 22. It's 2001 last time I saw them, so it'll actually be like 23 years since I've seen them.
It's funny you mentioned, ironic, coincidental that you mentioned the RV, because a couple weeks ago, maybe a few months ago now, in these bigger, I don't know if you saw these bigger spaces out here, but there is an RV, or not an RV, but a big, like, very old school, just white van sitting in one of the spots. And one day when taking the trash out was my neighbor, and I asked him, I was like, "Oh, this is yours. Is this new?" And he said, "Yeah, my lease is going to be up in about 2 months, and I'm just getting ready for this thing to live in." And he gave me a quick tour of it. You know, there wasn't too much to see, but he had installed everything he needed, from a bed to a mini fridge, a few other things. And sure enough, one day about a month ago, van was gone. And I messaged him and I said, "So did you move out?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm still in Austin, but I'll be pretty mobile from here on out." And
Nice.
he just wants to save on rent and free that cash up and sort of just live differently. And he made a great point that, you know, if for some reason he was miserable or it doesn't work out, he just moves back into some apartment somewhere. It's not that big of a deal, you know?
Yeah, that's what drove me out. I was renting, and they called me like, "Hey, we're ready to renew the lease," and this is the new, went from 1,700 to 2,200. Somewhere around there. It was like over a $300 increase per month, not per year, per month. And I was like, "Are you kidding me?" It's like, and I knew I had seen that house on the market when I was selling my old house, and so I knew what they bought it, or roughly what they bought it for. And I was like, "Nah, I know what you bought this place for, and like the fact that you're asking for $300 more a month." And I said, "You're trying to take advantage of people and get, you know, I know that's what the market's asking, but that's not taking care of your tenant." And the guy said, "Well, you know, taxes and all that gone up." And I said, "Yeah." I said, "I know how to do math. Leander has this tax rate. You paid roughly this. If you had said $300 a year, totally get you. I'm on board." I said, $300 a month? I said, that's just, no. Yeah. I said, and you're right. I know you're going to get it. But you're just not going to get it from me. And so I did. I went out and bought a fifth wheel. And, yeah, and it's, again, one of those things that the buddy I was telling you that worked with for a while has become friends. I happened to go visit them and happened to mention it. They're like, "You know, if that were me, I'd move in an RV." It's funny you say that. I had that thought. I said, "Well, here, call this guy. He lives in an RV with his family of 6. Whew. Oh, all of a sudden can I live in an RV? Like, goes out the window. He's got a family of 6. Okay. Went and visited him the next day, and he told me about a park that they were going to move to. He's like, "It's a wonderful park, you know, fantastic park." Okay. And it happens to be on the way home, so let's swing in there and take a look at it. And I'm talking to him, like, looking at doing this. "Oh, okay, sure, okay. Give me a little information." Well, I brought him the next day to show him the idea, and the attitude was completely different. It was like, "Oh, you're actually serious about this?" "Yeah." It's like, "Well, in that case, we have like 4 people that are trying to sell their rigs in the park." "Really?" Like, "Yeah, we can give your email to them. We let them contact you." "Okay." So I gave it to this one guy, beautiful rig. It's on like the nicest spot in the park. And he calls me, go and see it. And I say, "Hey, I got to kind of work around my work schedule." And so I ended up going up there. I was on call on a Saturday and pull up in my red truck. And he comes out and we're talking. And he finally says, "What do you do for a living?" So, "I'm an arson investigator for the city of Austin." He's like, "Really?" "Yeah." He says, "My son's in the academy right now." "Oh, kidding." So it turned out his son had just finished academy, had just started at a station. So I was like, well, now you know how to find me, and I know how to find you. So that's and I actually ended up turning it down and was gonna buy a different trailer. I went and looked at it, and for the cost, I was like, yeah, this quality is just horrible. And that one's on a really nice spot, and it's a whole lot cheaper. And I called him back. It's like, yeah, do I have a chance of doing this still? He's like, I was just gonna list it tonight. He's like, if you're down with the same terms, let's do it. And I think it was like 2 weeks later we started moving in, and bye bye rental house.
There
And
you go.
just putting money in the bank, and it's probably cost half what I was paying.
Yeah.
And so it's been nice. It's the part I didn't plan for is all the kids and stuff that are in an RV park. That my son just gets to walk on out and go play with his buddies and friends, and he's made some great friends. We actually made some friends who there's a family that was there from Canada. Their dad's a crane operator. Great time with those guys. They were probably about, I think, 9 months that we were together there with that family, and then the family next door to them were from Georgetown area, and they ended up moving to Connecticut. Well, they've decided to come back to Texas, and both of those families are in Waco right now. So we went up, visited in Waco, spent the weekend with them.
Nice.
It's like, this is awesome. So we had this little RV community that we're following around and stay in touch with, and say, hey, wherever you end up, we might come visit you.
Heck yeah.
So it's been a very unique community.
Yeah.
I've got a lot of neighbors that just they almost feel like family, and inside running jokes and stuff. That we have this one old lady, Miss Kimmy. Miss Kimmy's the sweetest lady in the world, but she has a very not loud voice, but a voice that stands out. And we have this running joke. It's like, can you quiet down? But I'll yell at her from like 3 spaces away. So you always look for the new people and just, put it on. You see people being like, what is the problem? And then you realize that we know each other. And it's just a running joke. So it's stuff like that. It's fun. But we'll leave town and I'll call Miss Kimmy and just say, hey, we're going to be out of town for a few days. Like, can you keep an eye on the rig? Yep, sure. And I didn't know if people really kept an eye on it. But I had told my neighbor, I said, hey, I'm going to be out of town. If your daughter comes or whatever, you're welcome to park in our spot. Okay. So I get a text from Kimmy saying, hey, are you expecting somebody at your trailer? And I said, no, but I told the neighbor that they could have people park there. And the next text was from him saying, hey, my buddy's parking your spot. The next text was from her saying, okay, yeah, he's walking over to your neighbor's place right now. Like, okay, I guess people are watching.
Yeah. At least she is.
Yeah. So it's just kind of a cool little community. It's been fun.
Sounds like it's a little bit more, maybe not extroverted, but people are more down to meet each other.
Yeah.
Than like something like this, or maybe even like a normal neighborhood.
Yeah, I think it's kind of part of the culture is that you're interacting with people. Like Saturday night, like we have probably the surrounding 3 or 4 neighbors always get together and sit out and have dinner, or just play cards or whatever.
Yeah,
it's been fun, and they're all a bit older than I am, but again, you learn from the people that went before you and talk to them, figure out what their challenges in life are and why they're in an RV.
Yeah.
Some of them are like, okay, well, you're in an RV because you had some challenges with your family and helped kids get through school and all that. Like, it's my neighbor's situation, and it's like, okay, you're not exactly where you want to be, but man, you made some sacrifice for your family, and now you're recovering, bouncing back from that now. So
Yeah.
they're great people. So, but yeah, it's been neat. And do I want it to for a whole lot longer? I'm not sure about that,
But for now.
It's been working good. So.
Well, Les, this has been super fun, man. How do you feel? You feel very unnervous.
Yeah.
You felt like those sort of all went away at some point?
Yeah, I would say so. It's been a fun conversation.
It has been.
Yeah.
Is there anything you wanted to talk about that we haven't covered yet?
Not really. No, I think it's like you said, it's just fun to, I guess, talk to people and see what their story is and how they got to where they're at. I mean, it's some days I sit back and like I don't know exactly how I got here, but it's I live my life a lot of just saying, hey, I want to be ready for whatever opportunities come up and hopefully take advantage of it.
Yeah.
And am I always the best candidate? Maybe not, but give it my best, and that's all I can do. And make the best of it, and hopefully be a good example to him, and give him the best chance to have a better life and do better.
Yeah.
So we're getting there.
We're getting there. We getting
Yep.
there, Theo? How have you liked having Thad next to you for most of this?
Thad looks pretty content.
Yeah, he's pretty easygoing. He was excited when you first got here, but yeah, this is Thad. He's a very sleepy dog. I sometimes think he's like part cat or maybe older than I think he is because yeah, he sleeps about 16 to 18 hours a day, and I think the average dog I read once was like 8 to 12 or something like that. So yeah.
Thad's in touch with his inner cat.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, he is.
It's awesome.
Well, guys, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for
I
having
really
me.
appreciate it. Yeah, best thanks for coming on, Theo. Thanks for joining us. I appreciate it. And to the audience, something new I've been asking you guys, instead of giving the podcast a rating, which I'm more than happy if you would do that on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube, is take the link to the podcast and share it with someone. If you have a friend or family member that you know enjoys podcasts, and maybe you don't know if they have or haven't listened to David's Saturday Night Sit Back, give them a link, let them know why you're sharing it with them. And thank you for being part of the podcast, and that way I greatly appreciate it. And have a healthy and happy Saturday night. Bye, everyone.